Loading. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay,
Mhm.
thanks. Sorry about that. So Grab is the local Uber. There's another company competitor exited the market. That's what we're talking about here in this instance. So we're going to start with localization. There was nothing like it there. They went in with no brand localization, just translation, right? They used operating existing models, nothing market specific. They had no regional or local payment system, and people ripping them off were all local problems, and they underestimated the time of integrating local payments, and between that and delayed for months waiting for regulatory approval that they hadn't anticipated. They had a huge delay in launch, almost a year. Obviously, huge overruns. Because they'd hired all these people and brought them into the country and set up an office and had them essentially sitting around doing nothing, waiting for something to happen that they don't have control over. And on the other hand, the actual integration into the market, they got mediocre performance because no one could understand really what the offering was, and so they weren't able to garner the customers. So localization is not only translation, right? We were talking about this earlier. It's the process of adapting a product or content to a specific locale or market. So
Yeah. Still breaking up. It's not
Yeah.
only me, right?
No, perhaps the rest of us could also turn our cameras off for a short while, see if
That's
it helps.
what I was experimenting with,
As
yes.
much as we love to see you, let's see if that works. Apologies for the technical issues, everybody.
here.
Well, we have lost you. We hear you go in and out, so we're going to switch our cameras off to see if that helps you as well.
Becca?
Paul?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
here. Are we
yeah.
good?
You're breaking up. So we all turn our cameras off to see if that helps.
Okay.
We can
How
also, yeah, let's give it a try, see how it works.
okay. Um, so what some of my friends' solutions were to early market localization included localizing the marketing, okay, and the top UI layer of, in this case, application, rather than adjusting things under the hood. So how the app worked, they didn't create separate apps or separate versions of the apps. They worked on separate skins because they were also rolling out in multiple markets. Some companies that were entering Southeast Asia tried to have separate apps and separate apps for every country, and found that to be way too difficult because a change here and a change there and a change in every country, and pretty soon you have 5 or 6 completely different operating entities, and that doesn't work so well. So what they recommend is localize the marketing, localize the top layer, but keep everything under the hood the same across the markets. Okay. The other thing that I thought was really important, and that I did not do when I was doing this, was to set a revenue goal in a market. And once you achieve that revenue goal, you could start localizing more and testing and those kinds of things. So you spend the minimum until you hit that target, and you keep it as this MVP mindset and hitting the goal and expanding. And I thought that was really smart. And maybe lots of companies do this, but I didn't do this. So and this was kind of a lesson that Grab and Gojek learned over the years, was simply to be doing that. And
Paul, we lost you again.
I don't know what to say.
Okay. Uh, do you want to maybe, would it help if we put up the slides, or maybe you dial in?
I am on the phone now.
Okay.
The other internet wasn't working, and that's why I thought the phone might work. Hold on a second, though. Let me see if I can move and see if that'll help. Give me a minute.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, everyone. No worries.
Yeah, apologies. Is that better? No, not really. All right, one more try here on another network.
Mm-hmm.
I think we lost him again, haven't we?
It's hard to tell now.
I think he's switching networks. Just give him 30 more
Yeah.
seconds. I think we'll be okay from there.
I'm trying to think if there's anything on our end that we could optimize. Maybe.
I reckon when he gets back on, we try to get him to stop sharing screen. And then maybe we can try share on our side.
Yeah.
That's suggested, Yaniv.
Yeah.
Record.
So while we were talking about localization and ways kind of to try that out by going thin localization at first on the UI, but keep everything under the hood working the same in multiple markets, and setting a revenue goal and only changing things and growing things once you hit that. The next step is regionalization, okay? And so what happens in a big country like Indonesia, or you'll find it maybe in the Philippines, or I don't know, India for sure, China for sure, Japan, larger countries, is that you need to regionalize as well. So it's that you go beyond even localizing. What Grab found was in Indonesia, they had a centralized office and operational model headquartered in Jakarta, the biggest city, but it wasn't getting any traction. And it turns out that each region, where the key operations and the key user bases were all behave differently. And so they needed to go even further down that road and have a regional approach, a multi-regional approach, where they had 5 distinct regions with separate GMs, separate entities, separate budgets, separate marketing. And what happened was it became much easier to operate, and it became more profitable and market appropriate. And so while it seems counterintuitive at first to make it more complicated, what they found was by making it more complicated initially with 5 regions and going a little bit more granular, they were able to drive more revenue, drive more customers, and actually make it work. So the lesson here, I guess, is get small, get local, and again, get local learnings before you start expanding. So the rule of having a target and only changing after the target still applies, but it's being applied to a smaller region. So it's not on a country basis, it's on a regional basis, to maybe certainly in a B2C instance around your metropolitan areas, okay? One of the other things that I thought was really interesting was that all of the big companies, the international companies who came to Southeast Asia eventually settled on this model, was that the best expansion model was not to bring in experienced corporate people, but hiring hungry young newcomers with, who had at least somewhat appropriate skills, but the go-getter kind of profile. So they brought the energy, the wherewithal, zero fear, And they were willing to talk to people and make things happen. And because they weren't more senior and they didn't have more at stake, they had no worries about jeopardizing their career or their reputation if it didn't work. And so those were the kinds of people that they brought in at the very pioneer stages. You're opening a new market, you're opening a new region, bring in somebody young and hungry and fast who doesn't sleep, and they'll do a better job for you than bringing in somebody senior and more appropriate from the regional team. And that's very much the opposite of what we did 10 years ago. But I think now that there's enough instances of the Grabs and the Ubers and the Gojeks and those guys coming in and spreading out across the region to make it work, that this is the approach that does work. So it's something to think about as you're considering having feet on the ground and maybe having some sort of operational presence, which will probably be sales driven. Get somebody really hungry and local in there to really not sleep 20, to be awake 23 hours a day and working for the best of the company, and incentivize the right way so they can make a lot of money if they're successful. And that works better. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Another interesting way of looking at this is that if you have budget constraints or you want to save money, consider launching in secondary markets. That maybe you don't need to be in the capital city. Maybe you don't need to be in the first tier metropolitan markets, but you start in a second tier market. Things are cheaper. There's more people to hire. There's all the overhead is less. You still get the same learnings. You spend less money. You can still solve the problems, see issues, and tweak, but it's not costing you as much, and it's not quite as visible. So you can start outside in the burbs or in the outlying areas and then move in when you're ready to go. And in some ways, this reminded me, this is how Broadway shows used to work in America. They'd tour them in outlying cities like New Haven, Connecticut, and places like that, where they test them out and test audiences before they got to New York and Broadway, where everything was really expensive. And so I kind of see this as kind of the New Haven approach to launching your product abroad. And I think this is really smart.
Paul, can I maybe build on that as well? I think that's a really good point, especially if it's a B2B play. Sometimes when what we've seen is that companies don't necessarily go straight to like the big, multinationals or the local conglomerates, because there's just too much risk to get wrong if you don't get that right. So they go for the smaller players, and then test, validate, and then from there say, okay, I have a confident enough in the value proposition, and then they pitch to the big folks.
Yes,
I think that was a really good point, Paul.
Yes, Josh, I agree. So it doesn't have to be geographical necessarily, but it could be ecosystem wise. And I think that, it works the same way. You don't have to swing for the fences and go for Coca-Cola right away. You can go for, a local version and a smaller company and work out your proposition. And I think that's really smart. So good point there, Josh. Fraud. So I know this kind of infers some ugly truths, and we need to bring it up though, that in emerging markets you have a lot of people working on fraud, especially in a B2C space. So one of the major players who I named previously in Indonesia found out that 70% of all of their transactions were fraudulent, which is stunning. Especially for a big company that has tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of venture funding behind it. So they needed to examine all of their users, remove all the fraudulent accounts, and build back with the remaining 30% of their customers. Okay, it took nearly 2 years to get to the same levels. So be prepared locally. How payments are made, how people are consuming. It's going to be different than what you're used to at home. Make sure that you have somebody local on the ground who can look at what's going on and make sure that you're kind of fraud proof in payments, especially if you're, again, getting a B2C payment. And like my note here says, investors hate when this happens, right? This is not something they like to see. So definitely take care before you enter a market and start collecting money, that the method that you're looking at is relatively fraud proof, because you don't want to vaporize 70% of your customers. That's really ugly and horrible to have happen. So cultural antenna, right? So we all think that we're all alike and we are the world and all of that, and we're all happy, open people. But there's all sorts of subtleties that go on the ground that we're in our communication and our styles that even with the best of intentions we're not aware of, and this can lead to trouble. One of my favorite stories is that I used to make TV commercials before I got into this crazy startup ecosystem. I used to make TV commercials, and I went to Indonesia, where there had been no TV commercials for 15 years. So there was nobody trained on the ground there to make them. So they'd hire me from Singapore and fly me in, and I'd make commercials. And I know that I wanted to be like the nice guy, and I didn't want to. I had these crews that were working with me who were sweet and lovely and worked hard, but didn't know anything about what they were doing. So I tried to be really nice about it, and oh, good job, guys, really well done. And I go like this, and they go, oh, okay. But nobody smiled at me when I did that, and everybody kind of glowered at me. And it turns out after 2 days or so, my client went up to me and he said, "Hey, Paul, when you go like this, it kind of means like that in America." And so I was sending exactly the wrong signal. I was trying to be the nice guy and be, sensitive guy, and it didn't work at all because I didn't understand the cultural subtleties of what was happening here. I was doing precisely the opposite of what I was trying to do. Eventually, we sorted it out, and it became a joke, and everybody laughed about it. But I was pissing a lot of people off without knowing it. So that can happen, right? It just happens. So having local people working for you on the ground to help translate and help you navigate makes a big difference. One of the things that my friend brought up yesterday was that in Indonesia, especially as you move up the food chain and you start working with bigger companies and more important senior kind of corporate execs, excuse me, is that the big corporate meetings actually are the result of a lot of little meetings, and the corporate meeting with the giant CEO or the giant founder or the guy in charge, the big cheese, is really theater. It's not really a meeting at all. So that what they ended up doing was getting questions and objections and agreements all settled in one-on-one meetings. I know they do this like at NATO and the UN, but you may not think about doing this in your business. You have everything sorted so that what happens is when the big meeting presents the results as a fait accompli and everybody looks good and saves face and there's no awkward questions or anything like that. And that will get you very far in dealing with larger companies within Asia. So something to keep in mind in your strategy playbook is meetings before the meeting, so that when you're doing this, it's you're all prepared for it. So get your on-the-ground intelligence, visit lots, shut up, ask questions, watch carefully, shut up some more, just listen. I know I am as guilty of this as anybody. Is I want to talk, I want to beat my own drum, toot my own horn, but really that doesn't help me at all. If I shut up and ask questions, I learn a lot more, and things move faster. And this took me a really long time to learn. So hopefully it won't take you as long. So landmines, and this is really the thing that keeps catching people, and it caught me a number of times. Laws and regulations and processes are different in every country, or sometimes even within the same country. Setting up a company in the Philippines is like a long trip to the dentist. They haven't fixed it. It's horrible. It takes months and months and months. And I have never, well, not true never, but certainly within the past 20 years, I've never seen the word octuplicate used as many times as I see it in Philippines when it comes to forms, that you have to fill out things in octuplicate, 8 copies, and using carbon paper, and still using carbon paper. So I don't know how many people have used carbon paper lately. So when you go to the Philippines, you will. And things just take a long time or become very expensive mistakes. My last company here in Thailand, I was reselling hardware and software solutions for drive-through restaurants, pretty benign. We had headsets so that when they go, "May I take your order, please? Your French fries and your chicken comes out fast." And we were 15 months of paralysis getting the batteries in the headsets approved, because for some reason this kind of battery had a problem in Thailand, and they required like 37 different layers of the government to make sure that the battery was okay, including us paying for a trip for somebody in the Thai government to go to Japan, to go to Fujitsu, you know, very large Japanese company, to see the manufacturer and certify the manufacturer of the batteries and the headsets to order French fries, right? You never in a million years would you guess or anticipate this. So be patient, try to sort all this in advance. What's it going to take to get my technology approved? What's it going to take to be able to sell X product or Y process before you start hiring people on the ground? Because the clock is ticking on them, and those expenses don't go away while you're sitting there waiting for it to happen. You can't really be selling or anything. So these are huge issues. Big and small companies run into them. Get a really good lawyer in country who understands your industry and your business. It's easy to get somebody's friend or brother-in-law or something like that because they're cheap and they're easy and they're happy. But if they don't know your business, they're just going to dig your hole deeper, right? They're not going to help you. And this happens a lot. I think everybody I know who's gone into a new country has a story like this. Try to avoid it. So when are you ready? When, like, let's say you've done everything that we've talked about here today. When are you actually ready to pull the trigger and go? So I've tried to put together a little list of this. And again, you know, I'll share these slides with you all. But excuse me, don't go until you absolutely sure there's a market for your products. Don't even bother, right? You understand how the market works, how and why people buy, and at what price points. I think this is really important as well. I sold a company. I sold mobile games in another past life. I had a company that sold mobile games before there were an app store. And the people who bought my company, I didn't really like them, but I loved their business intelligence approach. What they did was every new market they went into, they simply copied the ad buys of the competition for 3 months, for an entire quarter. They spent and displayed their ads in exactly the same places that the competition did, so they could understand what the audience was doing, what they were buying, where they were going, and how it was working. Again, very, very granular B2C kind of company, but I like the approach of being able to know how the market worked. So when they actually turned on the jets and started spending money, they knew exactly what was going on and what people were spending on and where they and how they were buying. I think that's really important. Understand the local, it's supposed to say localization, I'm sorry. Understand the localization requirements of your product, what parts need to be localized in order to work and what parts don't. Again, at least your first couple of layers for your marketing and your UI are important. If you're doing any sort of payments through your apps or any data transfer, make sure that you know how those work locally. There are certain countries, like India has very stringent laws about exporting data generated in India. And if you have an app that generates, you know, prawn farm data that you're exporting to the UK or the EU or something like that, chances are you're going to be breaking a law somewhere by doing that. So trying to understand how that works and where that works in advance will be really important, right? That fades into local regulatory and compliance issues. A local GM or at least a local sales head who's going to be your first person there, that go-getter kind of person. Make sure you have them hired. And you also have other eyes and ears on the ground and a framework of a partner network, which means who can you call if there's a problem, who, you know, besides your lawyer, right? Do you have a friend? Do you have an advisor? Do you have investors? Do you have other people you know? Starting to build that network, especially as you're a senior person in another market, having somebody on the ground that you can call who may not be the GM and may not be the finance person, but a third party who can help you understand or get a different perspective is really important and will help you sleep better at night. Cultural sensitivities, you're going to make lots of mistakes. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to look foolish. We all do it. kind of laugh it off and raise your hand and admit it and get on with things, you know. If you have a local partner, make sure that you all understand and clearly agree upon who does what and how. Write it down, review it, talk about it, execute it, make sure it's happening. The number of times that I've seen a misunderstanding over who does what with a local partner is incredible. It's very high. We all want to trust people. We all want to trust our business partners, but I think, and maybe it's just kind of my Western attitude, but I like to have it written down and I like to make sure it's happening. And maybe it insults people sometimes, but I find that I lose less money doing that than losing friends or, you know, kind of risking pissing someone off. Having a set of goals that when met trigger the next stage of growth and investment on the ground, or when to pull out. I did not do this. I think this is the best thing I've taken away from it, interviewing my friend. Going in saying we're going to spend $1 million or $1.5 million or $700,000 over 12 months. And if we want to achieve X goal, and if it does not happen, that's the inflection point. We fish or cut bait, or we continue, or we change, or something like that. Equally, if we reach that revenue target, this is what happens, and here's how we expand further. So going in with very clearly set expectations and goals and knowing what the next steps are going to be will save you a lot of trouble later on. We all want to be successful. We all want to make it work. We know, having been in startups, that's not the case. And so trying to quantify this up front and knowing what steps 2 and 3 are after that will really make your life a lot easier. Investors and boards have to be on board with you too. So make sure they're fully briefed and they understand why you're going and what your goals are. They may not all agree, but they'll certainly be happier if they know what's happening and that you're clear with them about what's going on. And obviously with your investor and your boards, you want to be honest with them, even though sometimes we're tempted not to be. The better path here is to be honest, tell them the bad news, get the bad news out of the way, be very clear, especially when you're operating halfway around the world and it looks like you're just pouring money down the sewer. Being clear about it's really important. 2 more. The growth mindset is good. A flexible mindset is better. You know, we all come from our own cultures that's different than other cultures. We'll be surprised and mystified all the time. So keep that mind open and be flexible and try to understand. And we don't know anything, you know. We don't know, well, we do know some things, but we don't know everything. We're the visitors, we're the noob. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to misunderstand what's going on the ground and make wrong assumptions. So relax, understand that you're learning and trying to do the best that you can. And it helps everybody. Finally, like, be the gorilla, right? I really wanted my Che Guevara artwork here. So the next version you'll see will be Che Guevara here. But start small, localize your product offering, understand the audience, be nimble and light, not corporate, be ready to change fast, set and meet the revenue targets before you expand. And if you can't meet them or pivot, go home. It's okay. It's all right. Especially if you go in thinking this may not work, right? You have a 50-50 chance of this working. You've done all the research, you've done all the right things. You're going to be nimble. You're not spending a lot of money until you know that it works, but sometimes it's just not going to work, right? That's okay. I mean, that's what happens in startups, and every startup book and every startup class will tell you that, right? And it's smarts. It's like getting, slapped in the face. It's no fun being wrong, and it's no fun losing, and especially when you're doing it in a public forum with other investors and a board and your company and stuff like that. But you can hedge your risks and hedge your bets and be ready to change if necessary, or to be able to step on the gas if you are successful, to really run with it if this does work, right? So try to be light and try to be nimble and try to anticipate what the next 2 or 3 steps are given the data, right, before you start doing it, and see how it works. And last, this is my last slide. I'll stop talking here. There's no shame in quitting, okay? I teach a lot of founders and a lot of startups and a lot of workshops, and I have a list of about 4 or 5 books that I recommend. And this is like the 6th book. I just read this book called Quit, because 2 reasons why I like this book, 3 reasons why I like this book. One, nobody really talks about quitting, right? We all talk about winning. But there are times where it's smart to say, no mas, walk away, put your gloves down and say, this is not the time to do it. Annie Duke, I don't know if you've heard of her or know of her. She was studying for her PhD in organizational psychology and decided to take 15 years off to become a world-ranked poker player. And she learned a lot about quitting and a lot about thinking in bets. Her other book's really good too. Really interesting woman, really interesting take on what it means to quit and what the psychology is behind it and why it's okay and how how to get your head around that. So I like this book. I now recommend it to all founders. If you're a audiobook kind of person, which I am, she narrates the book, which makes it even better. And I highly, highly, highly recommend this. If you getting on a plane soon, take this book with you because you'll come away feeling a lot better about making more difficult decisions. That's it. Okay. So let me stop talking and let you start talking. I'm sure you have a